For the German speakers among you, this video is also available in German to the English-speaking viewers. I'm doing my best here, or rather trying as best as I can. I'm glad I found an idea to conduct this interview a little differently than normal interviews, because if I were to speak English live or something similar, I would sound like a student in private tutoring. So have fun with a cliché German accent.
The German accent, yeah. Enjoy the interview.
Thank you very thank you very much. Last year I discovered the documentary George A. Romero's Resident Evil, a documentary, or rather read a report that something was being released in February. From that point on, my plan was clear: to be one of the first in German-speaking countries to talk about it and review it. I pre-ordered the DVD as soon as possible, waited, watched, and yes, I was hyped. I put everything into it. I did reviews and deep dives. I put the links here or here and in the video description. But then this comment, a digital footnote from someone that would change everything for me personally, and admittedly something I absolutely didn't expect. And that was the beginning of what was to come. But first, the intro. Before we get into the interview, a little background. For those who don't necessarily want to hear this preamble.
Ja, wer möchte das schon? Naja, egal. Mach endlich das CTA und leg endlich los.
Timestamp in the video description. But why do you speak German? Anyways. So, you end-time survivors, I'm glad you followed the signal and welcome to ApokalypseFM. I'm René, your radio prophet of the end times. I hope it's correct translated in English, I don't know. And to all of you seekers stumbling in here, don't be content plundering parrots. Subscribe, press the bell of doom. I promise no dubious initiation rituals. We're not part of a cult here.
Kein Kult. Wie wäre das mit für rostige Dosenöffner?
Yes. But this has nothing to do with a cult. This is our bunker battle cry. So if you want to officially shout it, then become a survivalist.
Für rostige Dosenöffner.
For rusty can openers. So back to the topic. After the comment, I was naturally incredibly excited, and I was already wondering what it would be like to do an interview with Brandon. So I did some research. I wrote to him and it happened. First of all, I'd like to thank Brandon for the time he spent, especially for participating in this kind of interview. One thing was important to me, not necessarily asking about the documentary itself, but rather I wanted to get to know people behind it. So let's get started. Your early encounter with Night of the Living Dead at the tender age of 5? This must have been pretty impactful. Almost like horror itself personally shook your hand. For me it wasn't quite that early, but I clearly remember sneaking off with my dad's Dawn of the Dead VHS when I was around 7 or 8. But before I was already hooked in horror genre, because my brother had these horror audio dramas like Geisterjäger John Sinclair. I don't know if that whatever made it to the US or was translated into English, to be honest, but I don't think so. But it's a long-running German series about an investigator fighting ghosts, vampires, ghouls, zombies, and all kinds of supernatural stuff. I used to listen to it on my old cassette player, sitting alone in my room like it was the most normal thing ever. The question for you is, were there other influences besides Romero that fueled your love for the area and the fantastic books, comics, old shows, maybe even something no one really remembers anymore?
I was introduced to Night of the Living Dead more or less by my mother due to her collection of horror VHS tapes. You know, it wasn't just Night of the Living Dead that shocked me, but you know, there was John Carpenter's The Fog, there was Alice Sweet Alice. I remember watching bits and pieces of John Carpenter's The Thing, Creep Show. Besides Romero, I had, you know, comic books. I loved the Alien series. I used to collect the Alien comics. I would get bits and pieces of TV shows that I would watch, most of which I don't even remember anymore. But I would also watch like special programs that would show you how to do special effects. I can remember at a young age watching some program that actually showed how to do the kind of effects that Tom Savini did. They actually showed off Captain Rhodes getting torn in half, and I remember that affected me so deeply. Can't remember how they even showed the whole thing, but I do remember him getting torn in half, and it's shocking the hell out of me. But yeah, I mean, there were novels. I would read like bits and pieces of Stephen King, and you know, I really just absorbed everything I possibly could.
It's quite a lot to unpick. I have to say that's an interesting approach to the genre. One could definitely say that's an impressive list of educational material. And then the Alien comics, I see a man of taste before me. And the special effects show, and especially that scene there where Captain Rhodes is torn apart in Day of the Dead, I think that's no longer a behind, that's practically a full broadside. You were shown how human anatomy could be reinterpreted at preschool age. And then Stephen King rounds it all off. You just can't get around him. Others get scared of clowns, but I kind of like them. I don't know why, but while researching you, I noticed how deep your connection to Romero really goes. And by that, I don't just mean your work as filmmakers. You both somehow have your roots in Pennsylvania, I think. And the more I think about it, the less it feels like coincidence. Is there such a thing as a Pennsylvania spirit? Kind of mindset, this mix of down-to-earth storytelling and the seemingly innate ability to sense the downfall of civilization behind the most peaceful front yard? Or is it perhaps the landscape itself, the mentality of the people, that something that makes you stick with it when most others would have long since thrown the towel?
Yeah, the fact that George Romero spent a lot of years in Pittsburgh. He wasn't originally from Pennsylvania. He was from New York, but he did live for many decades in Pennsylvania. So I wasn't aware of that at the time, but I found that really fascinating the more that I knew about him. And being able to actually go to the locations where he filmed his movies at. I've been at the Monroeville Mall where they filmed Dawn of the Dead. I've been to the Evans City Cemetery and Evans City itself. I've been to the Creep Show house. I was even at the Harold Browning Airport, which unfortunately was torn down 2 years ago. And there's been recent news that most likely within the next few years, it's possible that the Monroeville Mall is going to be demolished. It's unfortunate, but I've at least been able to share in those memories with other fans of his. So I don't know what it is about this location that just makes it a shared mindset. I really became enamored with George's style of filming, with his social commentary, and that's things that have been impressed upon me. I really liked his go-getter attitude. everyone that I talked to that personally knew him, that worked with him, that were friends with him for so long, said that George didn't like sitting around. He didn't like the business aspect of filmmaking, dealing with executives, being in meetings. He just wanted to get a camera, go out there and start filming. And that's very much something that I share with him. I can be very impatient when it comes to wanting to just get out there on set and just start filming, get the movie made. So that's something that, we definitely share.
Oh yeah, it's, I think, a real shame when iconic places like the Harold Browning Airport or the mall get torn down. They're more than just film history, I think. They're places where memories were made, but you're right, those memories will definitely live on, and sharing the story is absolutely priceless. Honestly, what makes Romero's work so timeless and relevant, especially today in a world that, I go out on a limb here, feels like someone just unlocked the bonus level of the apocalypse. We are practically living in an extended edition of one of his films, I think. I personally love movies with subtext and different layers. Those subtle messages lurking beneath the surface. They don't shout at you, but once you discover them, they stick with you. And Romero was a master at this. His zombies were never just monsters. They were mirrors, reflection of our fears, our behavior, our society. Take Diary of the Dead, for example. The film feels more relevant today than ever. Media truths, digital surveillance, this performative self-documentation during a crisis. 2021, 2, 3, 5 has practically become a live-action adaptation of it. And when you look at how the apocalypse is marked today as content, as clickbait, you just have to celebrate the irony of fate, right? The same, of course, applies to his other films as well. One could even say, by the end of his Of the Dead series, it was no longer about whether humanity would survive at all, but whether it even deserved to, I think. Was Romero simply ahead of his time? And could that be precisely why his works are more current today than ever before?
Romero had a way of just forcing us to look at ourselves, and sometimes he was very much ahead of his time. When you look at Diary of the Dead and the way that he showed that people can obsess over filming horrendous things with no regard for themselves or others while they're filming. At the time, I can remember reviews saying it was so unbelievable, not realistic, yet we can look all over social media nowadays and you'll see people doing that very thing. I had always heard that one of the failures for Night Riders, which was it was released in 1981. I had always heard that, unfortunately, it didn't do well because people thought that the idea of people dressing up as knights and jousting was just weird and no one would be interested in that. And it was because Night Riders was released several years before the first Renaissance fairs that, they have all over America now. So sometimes his way of just being ahead of the curve was also his undoing at times, where it would take years, sometimes decades, for films to really be reevaluated for just how awesome they were. And he really did have a way of putting a spotlight on social issues and doing them in a way that was entertainment. You can look at Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead is not a critique of capitalism. It's a critique of greed. And it's about needing more than what you actually need. And you see that in the film. They stop at the mall. They want to get supplies and just take a rest because the pilot, Steven, he's exhausted. He's on the verge of being a danger to everyone. So they just want to rest. But then they realize they can take the mall. They can get the stuff. And before you know it, they're living there. It's a fortress to them. And they start becoming too obsessed with everything around them, including things that they don't even need for survival. At one point, they walk into a bank and just take all the money and just proclaiming, you never know. They're taking Rolexes. They're taking fancy clothes. At one point, Fran has, I think, a fur coat. Most of them do. And they really are enjoying this sense of luxury that probably none of them had experienced prior to the apocalypse. And unfortunately, it becomes their undoing. And many of them die obsessing over the mall. I think that's really good critique. And I love George's films for that. I love the fact that you can watch them just at face value. Really cool zombie movies, really cool non-horror films that he's done too. And if you dig deeper, you can find so much more. And I love that about his films. And I think that's part of the reason why he's had this way of sticking around when many other directors have been forgotten.
You are absolutely right. It's almost unsettling how accurately Romero foresaw the future. And that analysis of Dawn of the Dead as a critique of greed, not just capitalism, is truly brilliant. This brings us to a closer look at human nature in extreme situations. Brandon, you served in the military, an experience that, no matter how you look at it, leaves its marks, both in profound and incredibly challenging ways. You still wear a bracelet given to you in 26 by a member of your unit. That's more than just a souvenir. It feels like a deep personal connection to something significant. So if you're open to sharing, how did that chapter of your life change your view of the world? And do you feel that what you experienced back then shaped your perception of the horror genre? Especially when it comes to extreme situations, pressure, survival, and that fragile line between order and total chaos. Do you find parallels between your real-life experiences and the way horror pushes these very ideas to their limits?
Yes, I actually still do wear it even to this day. That original tidbit was actually posted a few years ago, but yeah, I still have it. Right here it is. You can see it's very worn down because I've had it for nearly 20 years. It is a reminder of my time. Being in the military, being a veteran was part of the events that shaped who I am. And I do like to remember the people that I served with. And, it's also a reminder of some of the things that I've been through, that experienced through my years in the military that, while maybe traumatic at times, was also something that did help shape me into who I am now. And that cannot be forgotten, because had I not gone through it, I would be a completely different person. So there is a lot of good to come out of that. Sometimes they use the terms like, forged in fire. I've heard the terms baptism of fire. This idea that, you go through traumatic events and they shape you into a stronger person. In terms of how it's brought me to the present, and things that I've pulled from my time in the military, the military was very structured for me, and it allowed me to find order among chaos. They use the terms controlled chaos, and that's something that, filmmaking is nothing like war, but this idea that anything can go wrong at any times and you have to find solutions. And sometimes filming can be a mess. You can walk onto a set and just nothing go right. And when you're burning time, you know, I've been on shoots where we shoot all night and we have to get the shots in before the sun comes up. And, you know, we use the term, you know, burning daylight. And I used to joke during those shoots, you know, we're burning moonlight, just to get a chuckle out of people. But when everything feels like it's not going right, you know, the people that are in charge of the shoot need to come up with solutions. And you don't have that time to process the grief and go through what's actually going wrong. You just have to find a solution and push through. And I feel that's something that I excel at, because independent filmmaking, when you don't have studios backing you, when you don't have millions of dollars to pull you out of problems, you have to be creative. You have to find solutions that aren't just, hey, we're going to spend more money, we're going to fix it in post. You're expected to fix it on set at that very moment. So that's something that has really gotten with me and allowed me to succeed in my career.
Brandon, thank you for being so open and sharing such a truly impressive perspective. The fact that you still wear that bracelet speaks volumes to me. It's clear that your time in the military deeply shaped you, and from it you developed incredible strength and the ability to find order in chaos. Your comparison between the military and independent filmmaking makes complete sense. This maker mentality really seems to be a common thread in your life. And it's fascinating to see how your experiences from extreme situations directly translate to your work as a filmmaker. And yes, and speaking of extreme situations and the feeling of survival, even if it's on a completely different level, that's almost automatically brings me to another big topic that seems to have significantly influenced you. I think Resident Evil. Do you remember your first encounter with this game? What made it so different, so captivating compared to everything you had played before? My first encounter, I saw the cover from part 1 and thought it was just another run and gun shooter like Contra or something like that. Yeah, exactly, until the dogs came. The first door opened, the first zombie, and yes, the first zombie staring at me through the chunky CRT TV, chewing on some innards like it was a Sunday roast. And that was, how should I say, that's when I knew zombies, yep, that's my thing. It just clicked. And yes, I was about 12, 13, about that, definitely too young for it. But hey, I always knew how to open my brother's door, even when he thought he had locked me out. But what was your personal goosebumps moment in any of the Resident Evil games? Scene or an enemy that really stuck with you? For me, it was those damn lickers in Resident Evil 2. just disgusting creatures. Pure nightmare. And ever since Resident Evil, I generally look at dogs very differently.
Resident Evil. So I remember getting my PlayStation back in Christmas 1997. And around that time, they ramped up the advertising for Resident Evil 2, which was coming out the next month. We didn't get the George Romero commercial. That was obviously over in Japan only. But they did have an American commercial that used like tiny little pieces that had one of the zombies from it and a bunch of video game footage. And it blew me away because I grew up on horror films and it had absolutely everything that I loved about horror. It had zombies, it had this apocalyptic feel. Some things felt like John Carpenter, but then I really felt like it was a George Romero video game. And I just loved all the callbacks to all these iconic horror films that I absolutely loved. I remember watching the commercial, and because it was so intense, not really realizing that some of it was just cutscenes, like the alligator snapping at Leon from the water. I was like, I don't know if I have reflexes for that, with the controller. But I was like, well, I'll try. So a buddy of mine actually got it. I just remember being blown away by it. It was infuriating because when you first start the game, you're surrounded by like 10 zombies. And of course, with the tank controls, it took time to get used to. So it was a very long time until I actually mastered the game. And I mean, I'm not afraid to admit, or even ashamed to say that I actually had my buddy actually start the game for me. Once we got to the police station, then it was like, okay, I can take over because now I can breathe and, I can slowly work on the controls. But eventually I got through the city on my own, and now I can play Resident Evil 2 no problems. But I do remember that feel of claustrophobia. You were isolated. The police station was a maze, and there was all these monsters, and it just felt so intense. Like stuff was constantly breaking through windows and doors coming at you, and I loved that intensity. I loved the uncanny valley of the world that they created. It was a world that feels like our world, but different at the same time. There's certain parts of the police station that feel very grounded and real, but then it's inside of an art museum, and the main hall is like 16,000 square feet. It was just a really cool experience. And when I went back about 2 months later and played the original Resident Evil, and I loved it even more. It was the old dark house. It was creepy. There were soldiers running around. It had everything that I really wanted. And it also gave me a unique perspective on the story, because I'm playing Resident Evil 2 and meeting Claire Redfield, and she's looking for her brother Chris, and they're talking about the T-virus and the mansion incident. And then there's like mentions of Wesker in one of the documents, and there's all these like neat little callbacks to the first game that I had no idea about. So I'm playing Resident Evil 2. Then I go back to Resident Evil 1, and it's like, oh, that's Chris. Oh, there's Jill. That's Wesker. He's the guy that betrays everyone. And you kind of got, and then of course Ada. There's Ada in Resident Evil 2 talking about John. And then you find the letter in the first game. It was perfect. It was like this Tarantino-esque experience, like Pulp Fiction or something, where I'm playing it out of order, and you're getting a different type of revelation about, characters and stories. So I loved that.
After watching your documentary, I have to say you can really feel how much heart and soul you poured into that project. It's not just craftsmanship, it's passion. And that's exactly what defined Romero. Passion, drive, no shortcuts. He wasn't afraid to take the difficult path. I personally believe Romero inspired more people to do truly good things than most of these self-proclaimed life coaches ever will, I think. Your dedication to the George A. Romero Foundation and how you carry on his spirit, that's something I deeply respect. So I have to ask you, with everything Romero created, and I'm not just talking about his films, but also what he stood for as a person. Do you think his way of thinking and acting influenced your own life decisions? And if so, in what moments do you feel that influence most strongly?
Yeah, I think that George Romero definitely influenced me beyond just his filmmaking skills. One of the things I really admired that he would talk about, especially in the 90s when he was doing interviews a lot, and I was getting access to them because of the internet, I would pore over all these interviews he had. And he would talk about this idea of, treating people fairly and He very much treated his cast and crew like family. And you saw that with how much he reused a lot of the same people. Sometimes he, would put them in an acting role, and another time they'd be behind the camera. But he always wanted to continue to reuse the same people. And, a lot of the people that came off of those sets said, yeah, it was very much like this weird film family that they had created. And I always loved that. But I always really attached to George's concept of just treating people fairly. He is very well known for taking his time with his fans. He would have lines for 6 hours, not just because of the amount of people that wanted to see him, but because it was never about sign an autograph, now get out of here. He would take the time to learn a little bit about you and thank you for watching his films. And he had a sense of being humble. Everyone that knew him, that has talked to me, said that he was very humble. He didn't understand, why his films had resonated with people. And, that's something that I've tried to actually do myself. I'm always amazed when someone tells me that the documentary was this very emotional thing for them, or that they really enjoyed it. And, as someone who poured his own heart and soul into making the documentary, which, it's my eulogy for Romero. It's a love letter. And, I get some people that tell me that it's this, really amazing documentary. And, I try and, just, it's okay, but I am very proud of it. And, I'm proud of what I managed to do as a fan of Resident Evil. A few years ago, that's all I was. I was just a fan. I was in all the communities. I was on Discord, Facebook, and just talking to other fans and, sharing our love for the video game. And then suddenly I made this documentary, this official documentary, and to have, people telling me that now I'm part of Romero's legacy, or, I'm part of, the Resident Evil universe because I'm someone that did this, it's weird. And I always reject that stuff. I don't feel that I'm part of Romero's legacy. There's so many others that really earned that spot. But it's very awkward and surreal. And, people tell me like, well, you need to accept it because this is who you are. And I would always respond to people that the reason why I always want it to feel weird and surreal, like I never want that feeling to go away, because I always want to feel grounded. I never want to take advantage of it. And I feel like those are things that George Romero represented, within himself, was always keeping these interactions to feel weird and surreal, because they could be over before you know it. You're popular one day with stuff that you're doing, and the next day you're not. So I just want to enjoy it and, treat people fairly. And I do like to talk a lot with the fans, and it's kind of weird when there's people that are now like following me who are now fans of my documentary, are looking forward to Whistle to the Maples. And of course I'm now working on the adaptation of Fate, the Unholy Trinity. So I'm slowly gathering this, fan base of people that are just very excited to see me grow the career. But I'm always learning, and that's something that I always want to express. I don't find myself to be a master of cinema. I'm not a know-it-all. I usually tell people I don't know anything, because it can feel that way. And yeah,
it's truly impressive to hear how George's philosophy of treating people fairly and fostering a family atmosphere on set has impacted you so profoundly. That humility and appreciation for the fans you mentioned, that's what defines a true artist, and why Romero's spirit lives on far beyond his films. I believe this humility will carry you even further. In 2007, with your artwork for Of Corpse a Zombie Guide, you left, shall we say, a bloody little creative footprint in zombie culture. But let's be honest, that's just one piece of the Undead puzzle, right? I recently saw a post of yours on X. It had a very distinct vibe. You're not just making films and designing killer artwork. What other talents are lurking in the shadows that we don't yet know about? Do you perhaps have some surprises in store that we're not even ready for?
Oh man, Of Corpse, a Zombie Guide. Now that's going back a long ways. I did that back in, 2007. And it was actually a favor for a friend. You know, I did a bunch of pieces of artwork for him. Something I did actually after my first deployment. I was just looking for something creative to do, and it was pretty cool. The book's out of print now. You know, the author wanted to update it, but at the same time, I think there was 4 or 5 other books doing the exact same thing. So he just found it to be a moot point at at that time, and it just stopped being printed. Yeah, I do artwork. You know, I was always doing artwork. I was always writing growing up. So a lot of the times now my artwork is shifted more so to getting ideas out of my head, you know, for designs and things I want to see in film. You know, I'd actually done a couple designs for the Romero documentary because I had to show ideas to the special effects artists. Like, this is the kind of zombie I want, and here's what the soldier is going to look like. And, you know, we would do like these little like doodles. There's always this joke that Ridley Scott would storyboard a lot of his own stuff. He's actually a very good artist, but he storyboarded Alien himself, and it was his way of getting his shots in order, and they called them Ridleyograms, something along the lines of that. So I would sometimes joke that my scribbles were called Branograms, just to, you know, make like an inside joke that's a callback to Ridley Scott. Because sometimes I can be in a hurry and I just do these like scribbles, and they don't always make sense to people, but they make sense to me. But yeah, I love artwork. I love doing art, but I'm not as good as a lot of the other people that are out there. And, you know, for my projects, I typically hire real working artists who have mastered their technique, because, you know, I can't do the things that they do. But let's see, I actually do some special effects. It's something that I've been getting into for Whistle to the Maples, which was shot last year. I actually did some of the special effects on it, some of the gore effects, and for the documentary I actually did some of the location design, because we had the lab set, you know, and I actually did all that. Same thing with the characters in Whistle to the Maples. There's an undead character. I helped do the wardrobe and, you know, make it look aged and rotted, and it's a lot of fun. I built the soldier uniforms that are in the documentary in the Resident Evil doc, and they were bought. They're older uniforms, and then I would rough them up and age them. And the weapons you see in the documentary are actually toys, which you know, I painted up and made them look aged. And that was something where my military background actually gave me a lot of insight, because I knew where the stress marks were for those kind of weapons and how the paint would slowly get rubbed off through wear and tear. And same thing with a lot of the gear that was worn by the soldiers in the documentary. So yeah, I have like a lot of these like little things that I do that are unique skills. I just love to be creative, and it also helps, you know, being an independent filmmaker. The more that you can do, because I don't have to rely on as many people. It really comes down to hiring people to do things because I don't have the time to do everything. But, you know, my film partner, Tom Robinault, and I, we can do a lot of the stuff ourselves. And in fact, for Whistle to the Maples, we were doing a lot of stuff, just because it allowed us to keep a lot of control, and we could really get Tom's vision for the film, you know, get it exactly the way he wanted it. You know, I don't really have a lot more surprises up my sleeves. I plan to adapt Fate the Unholy Trinity, which is a video game that I absolutely love. And, you know, we're slowly getting that developed and getting the story written. And I also play tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and Call of Cthulhu. I don't play them as much anymore. In fact, I probably haven't played them in a couple years. But it was something I started in high school, and it just kept going. And I'm a huge fan of Call of Cthulhu. I love the game. I have multiple editions. In fact, I even bought the 40th anniversary deluxe box set that had reprints of a lot of the old books and the original rules from like the 1980s. So, you know, again, I'm a huge fan of that.
That's quite a glimpse behind the scenes of your creative process. From brandograms to self-built and aged uniforms and weapons, that's truly impressive. It showcases your versatility and how your military experience helps you bring authenticity to film details. Sorry for my bad English. But your ability to take on many aspects yourself is invaluable in independent filmmaking, and maintaining control over a project's vision is crucial for that. And tabletop role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu, that fits your horror taste perfectly. You're talking about those little things and the unique skills you pick up. I know that feeling all too well. I also see myself as pretty adaptable and versatile. My core point, as I call it in German, is my geistige Inkontinenz. It means something like mental incontinence. It's just how it is. ADHD, creativity, maybe there's something else undiscovered there. I have no idea. But for example, I absolutely love making music. I play bass, piano, or keyboard. I taught myself all of that. I'm not a top musician, but I know how to bring things together and how to gather the right people who can then create something wonderful. And I know how to do my own thing in that sense. My character, the Funk-Prophet of the End Times, by the way, developed from my active role-playing days. I wasn't so active in Dungeons and Dragons. I was more captivated by the world of Das Schwarze Auge, the dark eye, the black eye, and then solo zombie role-playing games right up today. Your dedication and passion for such projects are truly infectious. And that reminds me of another very personal story that stood out to me during my research about you. So you spent 15 years hunting for that exact VHS release, the one your mother owned. And then, out of nowhere, you get it as a gift from the owner of Creature Feature Weekend. Honestly, hearing this makes it sounds less like a coincidence and more like fate or karma. Or maybe just like the third act of a deeply personal movie. What kept you going all those years? Was it nostalgia, the image you had of it in your mind? Or was it that one memory you wanted to hold on to? And why that VHS of all things? What makes it so special? Because honestly, hearing about the search, the persistence, the final, you could almost turn that into a film in itself.
You know, it was kind of weird to have a search like that come to an end. You know, I don't think it could ever be made into a movie. It wasn't a constant obsessive search, but it was a lot of looking around. And, you know, every time I was going shopping, I would be looking at Amazon and eBay. And the problem is when you order things online, sometimes you don't get what's actually shown because, you know, for a seller, if you're asking for a VHS tape of Night of the Living Dead, they're going to look and say, well, there's 200 different versions of it. Who cares? You just want a copy of Night of the Living Dead. And they're not concerned with the fact that I'm looking for the exact box art. It was something that I really wanted to do because, again, it was my first introduction to George Romero. And Night of the Living Dead left such an impression on me. I find it a wonderful, well-done film. It is, to me, the bridge between older horror films and modern horror films. And you can see a mix of that within the film itself. There's some aspects of it that remind me of like the old 50s B movies. But then there's other shots in there and just the violence and the intense sequences that kind of push the limits. They really do. For that time, it was a disgusting film. And it's those aspects that start to make it really feel like a modern horror film. Some of the lighting and it's just a very well done film. I think sometimes the creators, you know, joke about how to them they were just making a horror film and, you know, it's not as good as what it could be. But, you know, it truly is a very well done film that's, to me, I feel is held up in a lot of ways when other films of that era really haven't. To look for that VHS tape, you know, it was a matter of just having something that reminded me of that time. There is an aspect of nostalgia, but it's also, you know, it's something that, you know, the funny story is the person that I got it from, he only lives about 45 minutes from where I lived, and a lot of people have never seen that cover before. In fact, I showed it to some of the creators of Night of the Living Dead, and they just said, I've never seen that. I've never seen that version of it. And they thought it was really cool, even though, you know, they were kind of annoyed at the fact that, you know, there's so many people that didn't have to pay them because it was in the public domain. He still thought it was pretty neat. In fact, I actually have it here, and I managed to get a few of the people from Night of the Living Dead to sign it. Let me try and, there you go. So you can kind of see how 5-year-old me would just become obsessed with this image. Like, what is this? This is disturbing to a 5-year-old, seeing these grayish ghouls, and they got these like red dots in their blackish eyes, or white in this case. Like, it's just disturbing. And, you know, honestly, this is more disturbing than what the actual movie is. But this piece of artwork terrified me. It really did. And but there was this lore to it. You know, it was like the forbidden arts. You know, it's like the Necronomicon. You can't open it and look inside and see what the contents are. You know, you feel like you're going to lose your soul. And it was that lore that this is something I'm not supposed to watch. And you know, actually like popping it in and watching it and getting terrified and shocked, honestly. You know, I would say borderline traumatized as a 5-year-old watching dead bodies get up and start eating these people. And of course, with the ending, you know, it was just traumatic. So being able to actually finally get that copy so I can have it on the shelves, and I have it and I can watch it, and I can remind myself of a really happy time in my life with my mother watching horror films.
Brandon, you own a real piece of the Evil Dead 2 cabin. Not merch, not a replica, not some cool little gimmick for the shelf. This is an original fragment. What's that smelled film history? Probably tasted blood too. So let's be real. How does it feel to own a piece of pure horror cult? What does it do to you? Creatively, emotionally, as a fan? What goes through your mind when you look at this relic? Is it just a cool collector's item to you? Or does it feel like every time you touch it, you're briefly connecting with the essence of the genre, like some kind of damn ritual?
Oh yeah, to have a piece of the cabin, it's actually very small. Actually, I can show it here. I have a little certificate, and there it is. This little piece. I have other memorabilia, like little pieces from production, not just from Evil Dead, but also some of George's films. And, it's really neat to have those little pieces and knowing that they were from a movie that I absolutely cherish. It's just very neat. It's also like a kind of a cool thing to show friends, when they stop by and say, look at this cool thing that I have. Because I have friends that collect, have wall-to-wall old video games or, lots of movies, or they have other stuff from their childhood that's just surrounding their room. And to have stuff from movies that they've seen. And, I have a wall of autographs and, just memorabilia and books. And one of my friends had once said, he has multiple rooms of video games and so much expensive, priceless things. And he had once told me, I'm actually jealous of your room. He said, I laughed at him. I said, you got way more stuff than me. And he said, I have a lot of fluff. It's a lot of stuff that takes up room. He said, everything in your collection is amazing. And you don't collect just one thing. You have pieces of everything. You have some old video games, you have old movies, you have pieces from actual films, you have autographs with people. He's like, you have one of the coolest collections that I've seen. So, that was pretty neat. But yeah, I love the fact that I have this piece from Evil Dead.
I mean, that you collect original film relicts alongside autographs and books, that's seriously impressive. And the story about your friend who, despite his huge video game collection, is envious of your diverse creation, I think it speaks volumes. It simply shows that it's not about quantity, but about the meaning and the story behind the pieces. You truly have unique and incredible cool collection that would make not only fans, but also film historians jealous, I think. I actually collect things too. I know it's a Tinnef or Shishi. I speak it in German. I think in English, knickknacks or frills. Little but the things I collect aren't just related to film, TV, or anything like that. I always connect personal memories with them. For example, I have a poker chip. My sons and we found it once when we were delivering newspapers together, just to take a walk or something like that. And just a little extra money, why not? But then it got lost. And eventually we found it again. Since then, it's been the chip of eternal return and disappearance. Just memories. It's always about the story behind it that makes even the smallest thing special. But your passion, however, goes far beyond collecting. I think you are an archaeologist of horror, a keeper of the forgotten. Romero taught us that true horror isn't just the monster, but the society that keeps forgetting what it really is. In a time when horror is becoming more shallow and insignificant, you preserve what the mainstream has long overlooked. Why is it so important to you to keep these stories alive? Do you still see the sharp societal critique in horror that it once had? Or is the mirror it once held up to us getting more and more cloudy?
I think for a while their horror films were kind of losing their edge where, they were starting to feel like they were just quick cash-ins. They weren't very well done. I can think of like some of the remakes that were going on, but then it just came back even stronger. And you see that with horror. You would see moments in time where horror would kind of stagnate. And a lot of times it was because so many people would do it as a quick cash grab. And then it would kind of, die down. And then you would have a whole new wave of people that were influenced by the previous generations of horror films that would come out and have new things to say. And you would get these relevant horror films that spoke to that time. And you see that nowadays. There's the terms like elevated horror, post-horror. But honestly, they're no different than some of the greatest horror films that we've had in the past. You can look at John Carpenter's The Thing and the paranoia and this feeling of communism. I've seen that there's critiques of communism. And then you have Dawn of the Dead being a critique of greed, over consumerism. And you have, Night of the Living Dead with racism. There's all of these great horror films by very great, talented directors that had a fierce, raw voice of stuff that they wanted to critique within society. And you still have that today. You have some really great directors now that are coming out, and they have a lot to say. And I feel that that's kind of the direction that I want to take a lot of my films as I continue my career, because I have things that I want to say, or things that I want to talk about within the films themselves, and kind of continue that same feeling that some of my favorite directors had. Yeah.
One thing I've noticed about you, and I just have to get this out there. You seem like a real go-getter, someone who doesn't let themselves be bent. That's definitely the impression I get from the podcasts and everything I've seen about you so far. Thanks for all the insights. But let's be honest, everyone faces setbacks. Everyone reaches a point where they just about ready to give it all up. You've surely had those moments where you wanted to bury your head in the sand or something like that. So what would you say to those who are at that point right now? Indie filmmakers, creatives on the edge of despair, about to quit? How do you keep going? What helps you get back up and keep moving forward? What would you tell those who are doubting themselves, thinking they have no chance?
Nothing that I've done has ever been an instant success. I have tried 3 times to be a film director, and the first 2 times never worked out. It was actually during the pandemic when I decided that I'm going to do this again, come hell or high water, just not failing this time. And that's what I did. Was I just came up with a very strong project that I was absolutely passionate about. To talk about George Romero and Resident Evil in one project, it's 2 of my favorite things. But it was hard. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what I was doing, and I really wanted to give up again, but I didn't. And the one thing that I can say is, don't give up. It's hard for a reason. It's hard to... I've been told before that I should be proud of myself just for finishing a film, because so many don't. So many don't even start. So to not only finish a film, but then to have it distributed, have it released officially, it's not something where I'm sitting at a convention table trying to sell copies of my movie. Like, a company actually bought it, and plenty of people said you should be proud of that, because many people don't get that chance. The best thing that I can say is, don't listen to the negativity. Don't listen, especially from yourself. Keep pushing, but at the same time, know your limits and know your weaknesses. And if you are not sure of something, find something who does know what they're talking about and what they're doing, and let them show you. Always be learning. It's so much easier now to get started in filmmaking now, because the editing software is available at your fingertips. Everything is digital. You can shoot things digitally now. You don't have to get film stock processed. You're getting the negatives ran through the chemical bath, hoping that everything turned out well. Everything is available. YouTube has plenty of courses and videos that can teach you how to do filming. You just need the drive to go out there and start filming. And if what you're filming doesn't look good, if you're not satisfied, learn what mistakes you're doing and then go try again. Just keep getting out there. And I wish you all the best. I really hope everyone that has a deep love for filmmaking and for making movies, I hope you get to do it. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of stress. It really is a job. It's, I, not to, talk down on people, but I've had people say, that, hey, filmmaking's fun, and these were, independent filmmakers, saying that, oh, it's fun being on set. It's so much fun to make a movie. And I remember looking at them just saying, if you're having fun, you're doing something wrong. It really is work. The fun is in seeing the finished result. And then also making the memories on set. You can have a lot of fun on set, but the process is grueling. It's very grueling. It's work. You're really going in there. And I've done film shoots that are 14 hours, 16. I think the longest one I ever did was 22 hours. And that was, 26 hours. I actually watched the sunrise twice in one day on a set. So yeah, 26 hours to film, and again, it can be grueling. That was the final day of filming, by the way, which is why we made it a 26-hour day. Some of the crew and some of the cast got plenty of breaks. They would sleep, but when you're a producer and, the director obviously can't sleep because he's there directing the whole time, we weren't really taking breaks. So, but yeah, just keep up with it. Don't give up.
Honestly, I don't know what to say. What you just shared is, oh man, incredibly inspiring. You're hitting on exactly what many successful people say. Those who actually done things, as opposed to those who just talk about it without taking action. I remember when technology kept improving for the mainstream, and people would say eventually cheap mass-produced pictures, films, stuff will flood the market. Yeah, to a certain extent that's true, to be honest. But I think consistency, focus, and the desire to actually do something always pay off and ultimately win out. I see a lot of parallels there. Nothing really clicked for me before either. I had several projects that just didn't take off. But I'm sitting here, and unlike other big names in the scene, also in Germany here, I'm still super small. But because I learned from previous attempts instead of giving up, I'm here now. I'm recording a video, and doing an interview with my very bad English, but it started with a filmmaker leaving a comment for me. Alright, we are almost at the end. Now it's gonna get a bit crazy. Quick questions, fast decisions, no time for long reflections. So let's go. You can bring 3 things into the zombie apocalypse. What are these 3 items you choose and why exactly those?
3 things to bring into a zombie apocalypse. I would say a Marine Corps K-bar knife, a canteen of water, and a one of those like survival books where it teaches you how to basically do anything from grow food to use a battery to start a fire, that kind of stuff. So I think between those 3 things, I have the basics. I have a knife, which I can use for defense. I can use it for, butchering, for food reasons with hunting, and, a canteen of water gets me started. The survival book can teach me where to find more water, and at least I can have the basics to survive. And of course the survival book almost becomes like a Bible where you just keep learning more things and how to get through different scenarios so you can keep going, especially as things get worse.
Early riser or night owl?
I am actually both. I don't sleep that much. I am primarily a night owl, and it is very late where I'm at right now. So it's, I don't know. I've always been that way. Even as a kid, I can remember getting yelled at for staying up all night by my parents multiple times when I was like 8 or 9. But I just love the quiet that night brings. There's not as much noise. There's something soothing about the darkness. But I'm also an adult and I have a family. So that means I also need to wake up early with the kids. So, I have to pay for it sometimes. So if I'm only getting a few hours of sleep, so be it. I don't get to do as many late nighters as what I used to, but I'm still up pretty late. But yeah, I'm naturally a night owl.
Imagine you had the chance to take over an existing horror franchise and put your own directorial update on it. Which franchise would you choose, and what would you change to take it to the next level?
I'm not sure what franchises I would do. I love the Alien series, but I don't know if I would have anything that would branch that out. And it seems like they're doing a pretty good job of continuing to expand the mythos of Alien. I love a lot of the new Alien stuff that's coming out between the films, the novels, the comic books, and all of it's interconnected. So I feel like the current people that are doing that are doing a great job. Other than Fate the Unholy Trinity, which I am adapting and want to make multiple films of, I don't know if I'd want to be tied down to do a franchise or even to do, say one film. There's a lot of other things that have not been adapted to film that I absolutely want to do within my lifetime. I'm a huge fan of Mike Mignola's Baltimore series. Mike Mignola was the creator of Hellboy, and he did this post-World War I vampire hunting comic book series. And originally it was a novel. Huge fan of the novel, and I'd love to adapt that. I'm a huge fan of Xenozoic Tales, which is also known as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. That's another thing from my childhood. I always describe it as Fallout if instead of all the mutated stuff and nukes, you have jungles and dinosaurs. So imagine, a civilization trying to rebuild on the surface after the world has changed, and now every prehistoric creature that ever existed is now inhabiting the earth, and you have people driving around in cars and vehicles, and there's like ancient crumbling ruins, and it's very crazy. But it's one of those things that once you experience it, it feels so right, and you're like, man, how did I not think of this? But I'd love to do Cadillacs and dinosaurs. I always wanted to do an adaptation of Dino Crisis. That's still something that I'd love to see within my lifetime. I think it could be done hand in hand with Capcom. Have their input, maybe try and reboot the game series, because I'm a fan of Dino Crisis. I don't think it was the greatest. It never really lived up to what Resident Evil was. And it wasn't so much by concept, it was by execution. And, what really hurt it was the fact that each entry in the Dino Crisis series was kind of throwing out everything from the prior game and, coming up with like different gameplay and a different feel. So you can never really grasp what is Dino Crisis. So those are things that I would love to see, that I'd love to do myself. So time will tell. But I also have a lot of original stuff that I want to adapt, and for the few things that I want to make that are based on something, it's a lot of stuff from my childhood.
Brandon, thank you for the interview. I'm truly impressed by your answers and the insights you've shared. Thank you so much for taking the time to respond so openly and honestly via video. Your words were incredibly inspiring and valuable. I genuinely appreciate it.
I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to be interviewed by you, and I really enjoyed this, and I love your channel, and I wish you so much success. Keep doing what you're doing, and thanks again.
And who knows, maybe our paths will cross on future projects. The small world, even across the big pond. And if you want to see more interviews like this, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, I'm René, the Funk Prophet of the End Times. But I say it in Germany. Ich bin René, der Funkprophet der Endzeit. Don't get bitten, also lasst euch nicht beißen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. See you soon.